Welcome to Authors Alcove for Fantasy Writers. This is episode 49 of the Story Savvy series, where Rebecca, a developmental editor with Heartbound Editing, is helping me self-edit my good story into a great one. If you haven't already, I encourage you to like and subscribe to the podcast. You can also join the Authors Alcove community over on Patreon. I also will be starting a preteen teen writing group called Dragon Heart Academy. You can check that out at dragonheartacademy.com. That will be launching 2026. So last week we went over how to get unstuck in the self-editing process. Today we're going to talk about the many different steps around getting feedback for the first time on your manuscript. Scary.
Yep. And it's kind of a lot, so everyone brace yourselves. But regardless of how much it is, I am excited to talk today about getting feedback from readers and everything around that, from formatting to screening the volunteers that you get. By the end of this episode, you'll hopefully feel confident preparing your novel to be read by outside readers, finding and sending it off to them, and know how to handle any issues that may commonly come up around it.
This seems very scary for me. So it feels like we are also talking about several totally different things all at once. Can you just list in more detail for us and explain why you grouped each of these together?
Sure. What we are talking about today is a bunch of different smaller topics that all essentially go into this idea of I finished my self-editing. The next step is outside feedback. What does that entail? And the answer is that essentially entails where to find beta readers, critique partners, or developmental editors, um, how to screen them or how to pick between different options with those, how to correctly format to send your manuscript to these people. There are some requirements there. What other info to provide these outside feedback readers with the manuscript, what sort of feedback to ask them to provide to you, generally what to expect from this whole outside feedback process, especially if this is your first time going through it, and how to deal with common issues that come up specifically around this process of getting outside feedback and then trying to internalize and process and apply that feedback.
So is that the order that we should do them?
No. So, sorry about that. Here is the correct order for doing each of these steps. It's essentially formatting, then recruiting or finding different options, screening them, sending the manuscript and the info that you want to provide to them and your requests for what you want to get back, and then dealing with any issues that come up because that's usually going to happen after you've sent the manuscript out.
Okay, so before I get into like my other questions, can you just clarify what kind of outside readers, writers should that we should be looking for at this stage?
Yes, so there's essentially three different kinds that you would be reaching for at this stage. The first is beta readers, and this is probably the most common option. Beta readers are usually casual readers. Sometimes they are fellow writers, and they are predominantly going to be giving you feedback from the perspective of a reader like you would have mostly consuming your book after publication. The sort of feedback that you can expect from them is notes like, hey, your beginning didn't really hook me. It took me a while to get invested. Or this scene is not working. It's just dragging on way too long and I'm confused about what's happening. Or I just finished the book and your protagonist doesn't seem to be acting really consistently. Like they're really friendly at the beginning and then they're really mean later on, and I don't understand why. And that is all valuable, but it's going to be a little bit generally more vague and reactionary. But again, knowing the reaction of readers is very helpful in guiding the edits that you do beyond that. So the second type is a critique partner, and this is sort of the middle ground, and this is my personal favorite. I run a critique partner group for fantasy, and these are almost always going to be fellow writers or editors or both. And the idea with a critique partner is that you give them your manuscript to critique, and at the same time, they give you their manuscript to critique. And this is nice because then you have something to do while your book is off in editing, which the next episode is about. But it's also great because it can really help build your skills as a writer to provide that kind of feedback on somebody else's manuscript. And then the third option for what kind of initial outside feedback you're looking for would be a developmental editor like I am. This should be the only paid option of the three. The other two should be free options. With a developmental editor, what you're paying for is essentially a higher level of education, of experience, of expertise, and probably a much more in-depth analysis than the other two options can provide. What a developmental editor does is they go in and they're going to look at your plot and your world building and your character arcs, and they are going to, hopefully, provide significant, extensive, in depth feedback about every little aspect of the story. And they are, again, probably going to do multiple reads. It sometimes depends on the editor, sometimes it depends on what service you booked. But with a beta reader, you might expect comments here and there. Same with the critique partner. You might expect an email with sort of overview notes. With a developmental editor, or at least a good one, you should be getting a full edit letter with like chapter by chapter notes at a minimum, maybe inline comments depending on specifics. And these three are all supposed to be looking at story, plot, world building, and characters, not necessarily correcting typos or telling you where you got a name wrong, things like that.
So I can say myself because I used you, and also like I know a few people who have also used you, like Myron May, and I know that we both have talked about how in depth and thorough you are, and I think that it's also very important to vet your developmental editor to know whether it's somebody who is going to give you the quality of feedback, especially if you're going to pay for it. So that's something I wanted to bring up. But I also just wanted to ask real quickly. You said that you do run a fantasy critique group. Where can we find that, and what is it called?
That's currently being run on Facebook, though we are looking at other options. And if you search for Fantasy Virtual Critique Partners under groups, you'll find it there. We meet every 5 weeks. We have a system to make sure that everyone gets at least two readers. And it's a really great group. I love so many of the books that I've gotten to read through there.
And do you mind just putting that link in the description?
I
You'll have to
absolutely can.
text me it. So, all right.
Sounds good.
I do want to ask about the very first thing that you brought up on the list, and you mentioned formatting as the very first thing, which I found unusual because I usually think of that as coming later in the process, right before self-publishing, or that your publisher would do if you did it traditionally.
Mhm.
Why is it? Why did you put it in this portion?
I know I've said this so many times before, so forgive me for repeating myself, but you do want to make a good impression on even your early feedback readers because these are people who either you're paying a lot of money, so you kind of want them to pay attention to the important stuff rather than this is hard to read because you've got blank lines between every paragraph. But your beta readers may also end up being ARC readers or just leave you a review of their own volition. And if they read a super, super messy draft, that's less likely to get you a 5-star review than if you spent a day polishing, formatting, and things like that before sending it to them. You are absolutely correct that full blown formatting, like to actually publish the book, comes much later. What I'm talking about now in these self editing stages, and particularly as you transition from self editing to beta or dev, is much, much simpler. You do not need, forward, trigger warnings, back matter. You don't have to have decorative page breaks, anything like that. I'm talking about editorial formatting, which is specific and very comparatively easy to do. I will absolutely include a handout in with this episode for a checklist that you can download directly and just go through it and check everything off to make sure that you have formatted your piece correctly for editing. Some of the highlights, just to give you a bit of a sense for that, is Times New Roman font, black text on white background, 12-point font size, double spaced, first line hanging, 1 inch margins. The idea behind editorial formatting is just to make it a lot easier to read through and provide feedback on. The double spacing was originally so that edits could be done on the printed version of the manuscript by writing in between the printed lines. That's not necessarily true now for most editors like myself who work digitally, but it's still very helpful to have a standard formatting so that as I'm reading each book from my clients one after another, I'm not distracted by differences in the formatting, like a different font color, which I have actually seen, or a black background with white text, which was very strange and hurt my brain a little bit. You basically want to make the presentation of the story invisible so that these feedback readers only see the story being told and not the actual literal typed out words with which you are telling it. That's the goal of the formatting at this stage.
I also wanted to ask questions about preparing our screening questions and feedback requests. And should we be doing that before we start looking for beta readers or editors? Just do you mind just sharing just a little bit about that and what that looks like?
I do recommend having these thoughts put together. You don't have to actually have the forms made yet, but I do recommend putting some thought into what information you want to provide, particularly if it's things like, hey, I know that this chapter is only half finished. I could not for the life of me think how to finish it. And you also want to provide and probably plan ahead what feedback you are asking for. So, using that same example, perhaps you need to ask your feedback readers, I need help and would love to hear your thoughts on how you think this chapter could finish in a way that is satisfying or intriguing or whatever your goal with it is. Having these thoughts planned out ahead of time is just going to take stress off the process of actually recruiting, screening, and sending it out. So, if you want to do that now, early in this process, while you're doing that formatting or just after it, I think that that's a totally good call.
So this feels like kind of the most important question to ask, especially for first-time writers like me. I had always heard about previously where you could pay for beta readers, but I know that
Mhm.
beta readers generally should be free, unless you go through something like Spun Yarn or something like that. Um, where do I even begin to find beta readers and also a good development editor, which I feel like I already know. So.
Thank you. So, I recommend, I know the platform is losing favor, but Facebook, specifically, there are so many active groups on Facebook specifically for finding free experienced beta readers. It's amazing the resources that you can find on there. There are other platforms. So NetGalley is one that comes to mind. You mentioned Spun Yarn. They are paid. Um, the beta readers sometimes don't get paid, but you're just paying to use the platform as an author. Basically, a beta reader is anyone who wants to read it and give feedback. So if you have an email list of people who are interested in your writing, absolutely recruit beta readers from your list or your social media profiles of any kind. Make a post and say, hey, I'm looking for beta readers. If you don't know what that is, I'm asking you to read an unfinished version of the book, or at least unpolished, and give me feedback before publication. You can also try finding general writing groups wherever you look for writing groups, be that in person or in digital spaces, and try making requests in those groups. I just suggest that you always check the group rules. Some encourage it, some are entirely for that, and some don't allow it. So make sure that you're within the bounds or scope of a particular group and then have fun. As far as finding developmental editors, again, there are Facebook groups with lists. There are websites out there with lists. The one that I'm most aware of is called All Call Indie. There are plenty of curated lists of developmental editors, but also just searching online for the search term developmental editor and then your primary genre, so romance, fantasy, mystery, horror, whatever that is. Go scroll through a couple of pages of search results and open up all of the websites, get an impression, and probably make a list to then shop through more in depth later.
One thing I want to talk about too is like finding a good developmental editor. I know for myself, like I knew I was either going to use you or a guy named Rob Bignell because I had a chance to interview both of you and I interviewed several. But both of you seem to really know your craft and knew it well and were able to articulate it in such a way. And you guys were also able to like discuss the whys. And I think that was for me a big reason why I chose you guys. And I chose you over Rob because you do focus on um fantasy and also because we just vibe better, like part of I think it's a girl thing because whatever. But Rob, I would recommend anybody going with him. You can just Google Rob Bignell as well, especially if you do more of the historical or literary fiction. But what about for other people who, are looking for and maybe may not choose you or Rob or someone like that? What are some red flags they should be looking at, and what are some things that they should consider before choosing to make sure it's a good fit for them as well as the editor?
I have a pretty comprehensive list of red and green flags, and a lot of this is from shopping for editors to work on my own work. Particularly the first dev editor I ever worked with was not great, so I learned a lot of things that I wish that I'd checked for or wish that I'd asked. The first thing on the list is, do they use contracts? As a default, you don't have to ask for it. The contract seems at least somewhat professional and protecting both sides. Do they have transparent pricing? This isn't necessarily a red flag. I personally think that it's really, really sketchy when someone's like, well, send me a sample and then I'll send you a quote. And I'm not going to tell you remotely what ballpark that's going to be in, or starting at these prices and then they'll give you a quote that's twice that much. If a website has very clear, like per word or per page pricing for their services, I think that's a green flag. I also very heavily suggest checking that any editor you're thinking of working with has very clear definitions of their deliverables. This was one of the issues with the first dev editor that I worked with. I was expecting and wanting and needing a comprehensive edit letter. What I got instead was a couple of Zoom calls in which I was expected to take all the notes. They weren't even recorded for me. So make sure that if you're working with an editor, there's a very clear expectation of, hey, you're going to get, for example, two read throughs of the manuscript, start to finish, full inline comments. That's something that I only offer as like a sort of premium thing because I don't like doing it. But at least make sure that you're going to get an edit letter with full feedback spelled out for you that you can then read through comprehensively on your own. I also recommend, related to that transparent pricing, making sure that there aren't any hidden fees or added things that you don't really want or don't need or that wasn't clear up front. Make sure that there are clear deadlines and that in the contract or on their website, whatever, there are very clear expectations for what happens if either of you miss a deadline. It frankly shocks me how many authors I see in online spaces talking about, well, I can't really do this because my dev editor is 3 weeks late with their feedback. I can't imagine being more than like 24 hours late with my feedback, and that's only if the author was delayed in getting it to me. So make sure that there are clear expectations there and that there is a very clear understanding of what happens if a deadline is missed to make sure that neither person gets screwed in that scenario. One thing that you can look for, again, this feels very optional rather than a watch out for it thing, is if a dev editor can provide an example of, hey, this is generally what my feedback looks like, I consider that a green flag. For line and copy editors, sample edits can be a thing, but with developmental, it can be really hard to give comprehensive, helpful feedback if I've only ever read chapter one. So examples over samples tend to be a thing with developmental specifically. Once you've decided to contact them, pay attention to their responsiveness. If that matters to you, I suppose. It very much matters to me, so I tend to assume it matters to everyone. If you email them and you don't hear back from them for 72 hours, if that doesn't work for you, that doesn't work for you. Go find somebody else. If they only have a phone number as a contact point on their website and you're not somebody who likes talking on the phone, okay, go find somebody else. Paying attention to that connectiveness and how they communicate and that sort of thing is very important. And like you mentioned in asking this question, vibe matters. Whether or not you just get along with the other person matters kind of a lot. And going off of that, finding an editor that has at least the option where you could do an introductory Zoom call or a phone call or something like that to check that vibe, to check and make sure that this is your kind of person can be incredibly helpful. So it's not a red flag if you don't have that option, but I would consider it a green flag if they do. And then the last thing that I really want to mention here is that, again, like you mentioned in your asking your question, genre fit matters. So if you're writing, let's say, a modern Western with no romance, hiring me as a romantic fantasy editor, I can probably give you feedback, but not as well as someone who specializes in modern Westerns could, and vice versa. And then related to that, kind of in the same point, I do recommend checking to see if you and this other person are sort of on a moral and ethical same page. I have a client, a recurring client, who went and tried somebody else and came back to me. And her feedback was basically, I really miss talking to someone who isn't making me feel like I'm wrong for talking about these topics. So check the vibes, check for some of these green flags, and once you have a short list, contact them, and maybe price ends up being your deciding factor. It's totally up to you.
I know you mentioned that you have a comprehensive list. Do you actually have a physical list, like a PDF or something that you could share?
I can put one together by the time this episode will publish, and I will be happy to put that in the show notes and the blog and everything like that.
And make sure you pass it along to me so I can share it,
Will
um,
do.
in just the website your website, where it is on your website. Okay, so, the other question part of my question is kind of the same thing, for beta readers or, our other less professional feedback readers. How should we be getting them to sign up or screening them or anything else like that? And I think for me, specifically the screening them, because 'cause I'm afraid, there's a lot of people out there that wanna scam authors, and, I was just curious your thoughts on that.
I think it's definitely easier to screen folks who are coming in through social media. And when I'm doing my own beta reading uh, recruitment, it's pretty easy for me to click on a profile and see if it looks super scammy or like a bot or not. But beyond that, I suggest using a Google form or something like that where you can provide the link, people can click through to it, and then you have a set of questions or checkboxes or whatever to fill out. Within that form, there are a few things that I recommend that you cover. Specifically on the screening side, I suggest always asking an open-ended question. And in my own form, that's the first thing I ask is, what interests you about being a beta reader on this book? Anyone who answers yes immediately gets moved to the spam file. Like, if you can't understand a single sentence question and provide a minimally comprehensive answer to it, why would I think that you can read an entire book and provide feedback on it? So same thing for beta, same thing for ARC readers. Ask an open-ended question, anything you want that they actually have to think about and write out a sentence in response. That's probably going to do a lot of the screening for you. I also recommend coming up with an IP statement, so intellectual property statement, and you can Google wording for this, but it's essentially, I understand that I am being sent this author's intellectual property under a privileged situation. I promise not to disseminate or, publish it under my own name, anything like that. Again, you can look up the correct wording. I'm not a lawyer. But have that in there and then just have a yes or no checkbox so that they have to, at least somewhat acknowledge, hey, I'm not going to steal your IP. And then lastly, make sure that they give you 2 points of contact. So you generally need an email address at bare minimum so that you can send them the manuscript that you've formatted. But I've found that also asking for any secondary point of contact, this can be a link to their social media account. This can be, their WhatsApp number, any other secondary point of contact. Again, if someone doesn't have two means of contact in their entire life, they're probably not a real person. Or they don't want you to be able to track down who they actually are. So those three questions can do a lot of the screening and really help you have a very healthy beta reading team. Beyond that, I suggest, having a slot for their name. Maybe asking, hey, can you provide a link to a book that you've beta read in the past? Or if it's an ARC team, can you provide a link to an ARC review that you've done in the past? You can ask, hey, what was the last book you read and what kind of feedback were you able to give on it? That kind of stuff. It's really down to the individual. If you want to check these out, join one of these groups and just look at the forms that other people are posting for their own beta requests and gather ideas from that.
So, when we do finally get to sending our manuscript off to be read, what sort of info should we be sending the readers along with it? And also, like, this is a big one. How long is reasonable turnaround? I know that that is probably one of the biggest things I've heard from authors say why they do not like beta readers is
Sure.
because. And then also, should we even try to impose some sort of deadline?
So, the information that I suggest sending along with the manuscript, trying to pull this up from my head, I should have prepared this ahead of time, is essentially the working title of the book, how many words it is. People need to know how long of a project they're signing up to do, your genres, your major tropes, and absolutely a blurb. If you didn't do a blurb earlier in this series when we were talking about it, you do need one now. It's not fair to ask a beta reader to sign up without having some solid idea of what they're getting into, and having a blurb, even if it still needs improvement, is kind of a baseline necessity. The other information to provide is your deadline, if you decide to have one, which I suggest that you do. If you don't set a deadline, you're gonna have readers who get to chapter 5 and then forget the book ever existed. Their life's gonna happen as life happens. So having a deadline that they can put in their calendar and being transparent about that deadline before or as people are signing up is very, very important. So I even include that in my forms actually. Beyond that, I suggest providing a couple of thoughts of your own for where the story is right now. And this all goes doubly for developmental editors. It's just there. You're literally paying them to give you exactly the help they need, so tell them exactly the help you need. But tell them, I feel really good about my world building, but I don't think my plot is really lined up with my character arcs. Or something like, I love this story, but I can't quite get the climax right. Can you help me with that? And then for beta readers, maybe you need to tone that down just a little bit. I usually have a little checklist of three things that I think is an issue going throughout. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how my male protagonist character arc dips in the middle and then comes back out of it. And I would like to know what you think about my POVs being split for the last quarter, things like that. And then I will also have a very short list. I it was way too long on the first book. I felt so bad for those readers. I have learned since then. Maybe three things. That is every single chapter. And for me, that's typically things like, were you confused at any point? Did you see any opportunities to do something cool that you think I missed? And maybe how do you feel this chapter flows out of the last one and into the next one? Whatever feels like for your writing, you're like, I'm not sure I'm nailing that. I need scene by scene checklist feedback on this. And then I would also suggest always telling your reader or editor, whatever else you see, I would love to hear it. It doesn't hurt to mention that they have your permission to also mention if they notice something that hadn't even occurred to you, that kind of thing. As far as the specific length that a deadline should be for these kind of readers, it depends a fair bit. For a dev editor, like I said earlier, that's kind of their call. but they should be completely upfront about it. If an editor, a dev editor can't tell you, I will have this back to you in this many weeks from the day you send it to me, that's a problem. And if they don't want to volunteer that, then that should be part of your negotiation before committing to them. You should ask them and have it in writing of, hey, this is our contract for this amount of money, and assuming you get it to me on this scheduled start date, you will have all of your feedback back by this date. Now, for myself, I realize that I work faster than most. Yay, hyperfixation. That's all I do for about a week, like literally all I do. So, for most novel lengths, 2 weeks is easy for me. That's non-stressful, but I'm still working on it constantly, kind of pacing. Other editors need 8 weeks. That's fine. They're probably working on multiple projects at once, which I don't do. Whatever the case is, know the answer and decide for yourself if that works for you and your personality and your schedule. For beta readers, I think that it's a little bit more reasonable to expect them to be largely on the same page across the board. And that happy medium space is 4 to 6 weeks. If you give them less than 4 weeks, you it's a bell curve. So below 4 weeks, it's more likely that they're just not going to have time to get to it, especially since this is not their job. They're doing this on the side, they are doing it for free, they're doing it as a favor. So 4 weeks is kind of the minimum for them to really be able to go through it. But then on the other end of that bell curve, after 6 weeks, I think you start running into people forgetting that they were doing it, feeling like they have so much time they don't really need to get to it yet, so they never start and then they drop out, or simply ending up in a situation where they read the first half in week 2 and then they see this deadline coming up and they scrabble to finish it and they don't really remember the other parts very clearly, so there's going to be some coherence issues. So 4 to 6 weeks is what I recommend for my own beta readers. I give them 4. For the critique group that I run that we mentioned earlier, that's every 5 weeks, and that seems to work really well for the massive majority of folks.
So, what are some common issues around development editors or beta readers that you wanted to cover in this particular episode? Because I know, like, I think the biggest one that I always hear is like missing deadlines, but what are some that you see?
Yeah. So I think I've covered all of the common issues that might come up sort of before or during this recruitment process. What I want to talk about here is specifically the issues that can come up after you've handed off the book and you're just sitting back waiting to hear back from them. The first one that's likely to come up in this process is that you send your manuscript to someone and you never get an acknowledgement that they received it. This can be disheartening, this can be frustrating. What I recommend is that if you don't hear back from them, if it's a dev editor, you should hear back from them. If you haven't heard back from them in 24 hours, ping them, make them say they received it and everything looks fine. For beta readers, there's kind of a lower threshold on that. I do recommend about 48, maybe 72 hours after you send it out. Just take a look and see who didn't even like acknowledge or send any sort of got it, and just give them a short little, hey, just want to make sure that you got that and the file came through okay. Let me know if you have any issues. And if you still don't get any response to that, probably mark them as likely to drop out on your spreadsheet or however you're tracking them. The second issue is readers who have too many questions. And some questions is great. That means that they're actually engaging with the work, they want to do a good job, they're really paying attention. But every once in a long while, you might get usually a beta reader who is just every single day in your emails or your text or whatever, however you're communicating, going, okay, but I just read chapter 6 and what happens to Alice? And you're sitting there going, you find out in chapter 7. So with these readers, if the amount of questions that you're getting from them feels over a line, it's totally acceptable to go, I'm not sure that this kind of beta feedback is really what I'm looking for. I would encourage you to finish the book. And then if you have any questions after finishing, but before you want to send your feedback, please feel free to ask them. I'm happy to provide clarity. And then I would love to hear your thoughts. it's okay to communicate boundaries is basically the point that I want to make with that one. The the next issue that I want to mention is when a reader taps out and tells you that they're tapping out. This can happen because life happens and they ran out of time. They know they aren't going to be able to finish and they want to be upfront about that. I have had to tap out on two books that I was editing, both because they basically had very triggering content that I could not engage with. They both got full refunds. I'm very upfront about all of that. Um, but when this happens and you're the author, it can feel really bad and it can really get in your head and make you think things about the story like, well, maybe I shouldn't write about this. Well, maybe I should have written it differently. Maybe people don't actually want to hear about this. And I encourage you in this particular spot to go back to your heart of the story from way early in the series and your non negotiables. Because there was a reason you wanted to write the story exactly like you did. And it connects with you, and it's going to connect with people like you. Not everyone's going to get it. And even if someone's tapping out just because they say something like, this is terrible, I don't want to read this, this is trash, you kind of just need to brace yourself. You need to have that armor of your non negotiable in place. And you need to be able to say, I really appreciate you letting me know up front. Thank you so much for signing up. I hope you find a great read to cleanse your palate. Have a nice life. And try to not let that be a problem. The other little point here is that you shouldn't argue with people about it. If someone reaches out to tap out for pretty much any reason, let them. And for this reason, and I'm glad this is coming up here because I meant to mention it earlier, you should always have a handful of beta readers. You don't want to have just one. My group that I mentioned, the minimum is two for per book if we remotely can swing it. Ideally, if you're just recruiting from the world at large, I recommend 5 beta readers for any given book. If you do that, you can assume that two are going to drop out, which leaves you with three, which means if you get some like two different readers disagreeing with each other on a topic, you have a tiebreaker. So 5 is my magic number for recommended number of beta readers. More than that, it just gets overwhelming and you have a less high likelihood that you're going to get valuable feedback from any of them. I think that one of the issues authors think are going to come up in the beta feedback process way more than it remotely could or does is that idea of plagiarism. If people are signing up to be your beta readers and you're doing the screening that I described earlier, it's very unlikely that you have bots or scammers in there. And the average person not only has no interest in your story, but the real value in a story is getting it published. And the likelihood that somebody out there is signing up for a bunch of beta read books and then putting in all of the effort to do publishing formatting and get a cover artist and upload it and do all of the immense behind the scenes stuff to actually publish it are slim to none. You do not need to worry about your book getting plagiarized by beta readers. And even if you do have those worries, trust that your screening process and your form is enough. Stop worrying about it. Anyway, and then the last issue that can come up is just when you get feedback. Well, okay, so the second to last is they miss the deadline. You just never hear from them again. Again, let it go. This is why you have multiple readers so that you're not reliant on any of them. If you reach the deadline and someone's like, "Hey, I didn't finish, sorry." Thank them for signing up. Say you hope that they enjoyed whatever amount they read. Move on with your life. And then the actual last topic that I will bring up here is when you get the feedback, it's not what you wanted or it's not what you expected. And this very much ties into how you not only just consume, but then apply feedback. And we're going to do a whole episode on that. I think that's 2 episodes out. So if this comes up for you, if this feels like an issue, definitely tune into that episode.
So I feel like we've covered a lot. Do you mind just giving just a quick overview of everything you just said, just to wrap everything up?
Yes. So the general feedback reader process essentially looks like preparing for that that next big scary step, and that includes the formatting, that might include finishing your last read of your book, and that includes preparing out ahead of time what information you want to provide with it to get people interested in reading it, to help them read it more accurately, or to preparing your questions to help them give you the feedback that you want. Then you take that plunge and you go find your beta readers or your dev editor and you contact them or you have them fill in a form, you make lists, you get contracts, you do whatever you need to do to sort of lock these people in committed to doing this project. Then you send all of that information, you send them the manuscript, you try to be polite, try to be professional, and then step back. Next week's episode is entirely on what to do while you are waiting to hear back because you don't want to keep tinkering with your manuscript. You want to let it be out of your hands for 4 to 6 weeks, probably. Do other things that we'll talk about next week, and then just deal with things as they come up. Honestly, probably most of the time, you won't have any issues. None of those things that I mentioned are going to come up because this is an established part of the self-editing or just general feedback process. People know how it works. It's been happening for a long time. Chances are it'll go smoothly, so don't stress yourselves out. And then eventually you will get to receiving this feedback back, and that is what the episode after that is going to be all about.
Well, as always, thank you so much for all of your feedback. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking great questions as always. And next week, like I just said, we are going to go over how you can best spend your time not tinkering with your story while it's out with feedback readers, but still be productive around the whole process. For now, huge, huge thank you to everyone who listens to or watches this podcast. If you know any other authors who are nearing the end of their first draft or struggling with revising or rewriting their novel, please send them our way. The more authors we can help understand and finish the process of self editing, the better. Thank you, Agnes, and I will see you all next week.
And thank you. And remember, she is a developmental editor, specializes in romantasy, also other fantasies as well. And also, you said you had that critique group. Do you mind just saying that name of that critique group again?
Absolutely. That is on Facebook, and it is a group called Fantasy Virtual Critique Partners, and I will absolutely include the link to that in the show notes.
All right. Thank you very much. See you next week.